Hey there, friends! It's that quiet time again, isn't it? The kind where the world outside fades into a soft hum, and all you need is a cozy spot under the covers. Dim those lights if you haven't already, grab your favorite blanket, and let's ease into this together. Tonight, we're drifting back to the medieval world, not the flashy battles or grand castles, but the quirky little rules that kept everything ticking along. You know, those weird medieval rules that existed for really good reasons, or at least reasons that made sense back then. We'll wander through them slowly, one by one, like flipping pages in an old, dusty book. No rush, no drama, just a gentle float through history's peculiarities. Relax, breathe easy, and let the words carry you off to sleep. So, picture this. Europe in the Middle Ages. A time when life was all about survival, superstition, and staying in your lane. Kings and queens sat on thrones, but even they had to navigate a web of customs and laws that seemed downright bizarre to us now. But hey, these rules weren't just pulled out of thin air. They had purposes, practical ones, mostly to keep society from unraveling. Let's start with something simple, like the ban on playing football. Yeah, you heard that right. In 1349, King Edward III of England decided enough was enough and outlawed the game. Not because he hated fun, but because it was a total mess. Back then, football wasn't the polished sport we know today. It was more like a village-wide brawl with a pig's bladder as the ball. Teams could be entire towns, kicking and punching their way across fields, sometimes for miles. Injuries, constant, deaths, not uncommon. Not uncommon. People got trampled, bones broken, all in the name of scoring. And Edward? Well, he had bigger problems. England was knee-deep in the 100 Years' War with France, and the Black Death was wiping out folks, left and right. And need-dead, able-bodied men practicing archery for the army, not wasting time on chaotic games that left them battered. So, the punishment, 6 days in prison. Harsh, but practical, because why risk your workforce on a pastime that mimicked warfare without the glory? Of course, people probably grumbled, but it kept the kingdom's defenses sharp. Imagine trying to explain that to a modern soccer fan. Sorry, mate, no Premier League because the king needs bowmen. Floating along from there, we hit another rule that sounds absurd. Blowing your nose in the street was illegal in places like Newmarket, Suffolk. Yeah, just a casual sniffle could land you a fine. But again, there was a reason tied to the town's obsession with horses. Newmarket was horse racing central, dating back to the 12th century, and kings like James I turned it into a big deal by the 1600s. Those steeds were valuable big money in breeding and betting, and horses, delicate as they are, could catch colds from human germs. So, no nose-blowing in public, lest you sicken the prized animals. It was all about protecting the economy. Really, royals loved their races. Henry VIII probably would have approved, given his gambling habits, sarcastic aside, because nothing says royal privilege like fining peasants for hay fever. But hey, it kept the tracks running smoothly, and the king's coffers full. Now, let's ease into the world of marriage rules, where things get a bit darker and more personal. Peasants and serfs couldn't just tie the knot whenever they fancied. No, they needed permission from their lord or master first. And if you were a widow, the landowner could force you to remarry, pronto, or face punishment. Why? Feudalism. That's why. Society was stacked like a pyramid, with kings at the top and everyone else owing loyalty downward. Lords controlled the land, and by extension, the people on it. Marriage meant alliances, labor, and kids to work the fields. Letting folks marry freely could have disrupted that balance. Mabea serf marries into a better spot, or a widow holds out and leaves land unproductive. It was about control, plain and simple. Think of it in royal terms. Kings like Edward I arranged marriages for their kids to secure kingdoms. So why not scale that down to the peasants? Of course, it led to some tragic personal stories, forced unions, broken hearts, but it kept the system stable. No emotional meltdowns allowed, just quiet obedience. Speaking of control, Those long, pointy shoes, totally forbidden for the lower classes. We're talking krakos, or pikes. These ridiculous footwear extensions that could stretch 5 inches past the toe, sometimes chained to the knee for support, from 1463 to 1604 in England. Anyone below knight, esquire, gentleman, or lord rank caught wearing them over 2 inches long faced a fine 3 shillings and 4 pence, which was no small change. The reason? Sumptuary laws, baby. These were all about keeping social ranks visible. If a peasant struts around in fancy kicks, how do you tell them apart from nobility? It blurred the lines, and medieval elites hated that. Fashion was a status symbol, think Habsburg royals, with their elaborate outfits, hiding in breeding flaws behind silk and gold. But for the common folk, it was a no-go. Ironic contrast. These shoes were meant to scream masculinity and wealth, but they made walking a comedy of errors, tripping hazards everywhere. Yet the rule preserved hierarchy, preventing upstarts from dressing above their station. Because why let a farmer feel fancy when the king needs to stand out? Let's glide over to food restrictions, because nothing says medieval weirdness like laws on what you can eat. In 1336, England passed a rule limiting meals to 2 courses. Max, no matter your rank. Soup counted as a whole course, by the way. But you get a third on holidays like Christmas. Sumptuary laws again, aimed at curbing excess. Why? Resources were scarce, famines hit hard, and overeating by the rich meant less for everyone else. Plus, it stopped lower classes from aping the elite's lavish feasts. Royals like Richard II threw banquets with dozens of courses, peacocks on platters, all to show power. But for the rest, moderation, enforced. It was about moral and economic control, preventing debt from fancy dining. Dry humor here. Imagine a lord staring at his 3rd bowl of soup, thinking, well, this is festive. But it made sense kept society from bankrupting itself on gluttony. And while we're on Odeilsia, those trials by fire or water sound nightmarish, but they had a purpose until 1215. Accused of a crime? Grab a red-hot iron, walk 3 paces, and if your hand healed clean after 3 days, you were innocent. Or get tossed in water. Sink, and you're pure. Hopefully someone fishes you out. Float, and you're guilty. Off to the gallows. Combat ordeals pitted you against your accuser, with God supposedly siding with the righteous. Reason. No modern forensics. So, divine judgment filled the gap. It terrified people into behaving, especially the poor who couldn't afford lawyers. Kings like Henry II reformed the system eventually, introducing juries, but before that, it maintained order through fear. Tragic for the innocent. Sherborne's drownings, but in a lawless era. It was a crude justice tool. Sarcastic note, because nothing says fair trial like betting on miracles. Easing further, sex rules were restrictive, to say the least. Married couples could only do the deed on certain days. Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday. No Thursdays or Fridays prep for communion. No Sundays, Lord's Day. Add in bans during Lent, 4762 days. Advent 35 before Christmas. Pentecost, 4060 days. Why? Church control over bodies and souls. Sex was for procreation, not pleasure, and aligning it with holy calendars kept folks pious. Royals weren't exempt. Henry VIII's marital woes stemmed partly from these norms, twisting into annulments and but the rule aimed to instill discipline, preventing immoral distractions. Ironic, eyes were blamed for temptation, so women avoided gazing at men, as if that stopped anything. Yet, it reinforced the era's religious grip, keeping dynasties purer, so they thought. Now, Denise. Forbidden for non-nobles in 1485, except on Christmas. Young men below elite rank couldn't play. Reason: it distracted laborers from work and encouraged gambling in hidden spots. Plus, it was a king's sport. Henry VII and VIII loved it. With its pricey gear and etiquette, keeping it upper-class preserved hierarchy. Imagine peasants sneaking rallies. Fines awaited. But it ensured productivity, vital in an agrarian world. Blasphemy punishments were brutal: lose your tongue via hot pliers for bad-mouthing God. Why? Church power. It silenced dissent. Maintaining order. Royals enforced it to align with divine right. Tragic muteness for the outspoken. But it kept the faithful in line. Witchcraft. Death penalty from 1542. Blamed for plagues. Bad crops. Reason. Explained the inexplicable, directing fear away from God or kings. Poor old women suffered most. Executed in hundreds, royals like James VI wrote treatises on it, fueling hunts. Dark, but it protected society from perceived evil. Let's drift to royal fish wells. Sturgeons claimed by the crown, if caught near shore, from 1324. Edward II's greed, valuable for oil and feasts. Still law today, as in 2004, with a sturgeon needing Queen's okay, kept resources royal, funding wars. Swans. All wild ones belong to the English monarch since the 12th century. Marked for ownership, privileges granted for loyalty. Annual counting ceremony persists. Reason, status symbol, controlling luxury. Trial by combat fight to prove innocence. God aiding the just. Lasted till 1819. Reason, divine justice in uncertain times. Ordeals like hot metal or blessed bread survive. And you're innocent. Charlemagne's era. Psychological deterrent. Slander. Pay fine. Hold nose in market. Declare liar. Norman law. Public shame. Stocks mandatory in parishes from 1405. Humiliation for petty crimes. Sumptuary laws on clothes. Food status enforcement. Prostitutes in yellow. Venice 1420s. Tax and control. Anti-Welsh curfew in Chester. 1403 decapitation risk. Rebellion fears. Refusing knighthood. Lose lands. 1233. Costly honor. Animal trials. Pigs hanged for crimes. Moral accountability. That's our gentle wander through the first batch. These rules, weird as they are, glued medieval life together. From kings like Edward II hoarding fish to peasants dodging shoe fines. It was all about balance, or imbalance, depending on your rank. Let's keep floating. Picking up where we left off, without missing a beat, let's meander into more of these peculiar regulations. Remember, no big leaps, just a smooth glide from one oddity to the next. We're still in that medieval haze, where every rule had a hidden logic, often tied to power, fear, or plain old survival. Take the statute forbidding bearing of armor from 1313 in England. Edward II made it illegal to show up at Parliament armed or with armored goons. Why? The guy was in over his head with pushy barons who intimidated him by clanking in like walking fortresses. It was about self-protection for a weak king, preventing bullying in the halls of power. Of course, it didn't fully work. Nobles found other ways to scheme, but it set a tone for civil discourse. Sarcastic aside, because nothing says productive debate like swords at the ready. Royals like Edward needed this to survive their own courts, full of backstabbing intrigue. From arms to animals, let's touch on the clipping of coinage. In medieval times, shaving bits off coins for profit was a serious crime. Punishment, harsh fines, or worse. Reason, protected the economy. Coins were precious metal. Clipping devalued them, causing inflation and trade chaos. Kings relied on stable currency for taxes and wars. Think Henry III, who dealt with day-based money during his reign. It kept commerce honest, or as honest as it got back then. Ironic, royals sometimes clipped their own coins to fund extravagance, but peasants got the axe for it. Dynastic weirdness at its finest. Elites, bending rules they enforced. Easing into bathhouse regulations, medieval laws oversaw these spots closely. In places like France or England, mixed bathing was restricted to prevent immoral behavior. Why? Bathhouses were social hubs, but they bred vice, prostitution, affairs. The church and kings wanted morality upheld, especially post-plague when hygiene mattered, but sin loomed large. Royals like Louis XIV later avoided baths altogether, fearing disease. But in medieval times, it was about control. Tragic for the common folk. a rare luxury turned suspicious, but it curbed outbreaks of more than just dirt. Now, the ban on selling gingerbread in medieval France, associated with pagan rituals, it was outlawed. Reason? Christianization stamp. Out old customs. Gingerbread was festive, but linked to pre-Christian feasts. Kings pushed these laws to unify under the church. Dry humor. Imagine a baker fined for spicy treats. Yet, it helped shift culture, making holidays pure. Curfew laws required folks indoors after dark. Bells rang. Fires covered curfew from cover fire. Why? Safety prevented crime. Fires in wooden towns. Royals enforced it to maintain order, especially in rebellious areas. Still echoes in modern minor curfews. Kept nights quiet, lives safe, ban on eating pies on Christmas in England shan. As pagan, Oliver Cromwell's era amplified it, but roots medieval. Reason? Suppress non-Christian traditions. Royals like Charles I indulged anyway, but it controlled the masses. Defenestration of Cats Act. Superstition ruled cats thrown out windows to expel evil spirits. Law prevented it, protecting homes from bad luck. Why? Belief in possession. Royals had cat superstitions too. Edward III's court likely nodded along. Weird, but good for warding off demons. Dueling laws banned it eventually, but medieval Europe allowed it for honor. Reason for ban. Too many deaths among nobles. Kings like Henry IV saw it disrupt courts, still on books in some places, outlawing wasteful meals in England's extravagant feasts. Restricted. Why? Resource conservation, moral moderation. Royals threw them, but laws curbed lower imitation. Witchcraft laws we touched, but anti-witchcraft persisted because unexplained woes needed scapegoats. James I's demonology fueled it. Tragic executions, but reasoned as societal protection. Let's float to the assize of bread, regulating weight and price. Bakers fined 4 short loaves. Why? Prevent fraud in staple food. Kings like John said it in 1266. Kept hunger at bay. Economy stable. Sarcastic, because nothing's worse than a light roll in famine times. Ordeals by cross-hold arms out. Drop first. Lusus. Charlemagne's fave. Divine test for disputes. Public shaming for nagging wives scolds bridle. A metal gag. Why? Maintain household peace. Patriarchal control. Royals' wives escaped, but commoners suffered. Dark, but reasonable for order. Animal excommunications. Mice, cursed for eating grain. Ecclesiastical courts. Why? Blame pests. Divinely. Kept faith in God's justice. Pig trouseos, hanged for killing kids. Reason? Animals. As moral agents. Tragic comedy-dressed pigs in court. Welsh ban in Chester nighttime decapitation risk. Henry IV's fear during Glenpoor revolt. Protected English borders. Yellow for prostitutes in Venice. Why? Identification for tax, control, spread. Kept trade orderly in Port City. Mandatory stocks in villages. Humiliation device for drunks, liars. Why? Cheap justice, deterrent, refusing knighthood finelands, seized. Henry III's response to cost dodgers, ensured military readiness. These rules paint a picture of a world clinging to structure amid chaos. Kings inbred and quirky, like the Habsburgs with their jaws, enforced them to hold power. Peasants bore the brunt. Their lives, tragic footnotes. But etchad, a good reason survival. Faith, hierarchy. Still with me. Good. We're gliding deeper now. No abrupt turns. Just more layers of these strange medieval mandates. Each one a quiet reminder of how folks back then tried to make sense of a harsh world. Let's pick up with the law against blasphemy, which we glanced at earlier. Speaking ill of God or saints could cost you your tongue ripped out with hot pliers, or stoning, hanging. The church pushed this hard, and kings backed it. Why? Control narratives. Dissent threatened the divine right of rulers. Think Richard the Lionheart, crusading to prove piety, while enforcing home rules. It silenced critics, keeping the populace meek. Dark for the victims, mute for life, but good for unity under God and crown. Easing along, sumptuary laws on clothing deserve another nod. Not just shoes, but fabrics. Colors restricted by class. Peasants stuck to wool. No silk or purple that was royal. Why? Visible hierarchy prevented social climbing. Elizabeth I's court glittered, but laws kept imitators down. Inbreeding among elites made them quirky odd habits like Charles II's fidgeting, but dress codes hid flaws. Ironic. Royals spoiled, sickly, yet dictating fashion to the healthy poor. Food, sumptuary tuno, extravagant banquets for lower ranks. Reason, economic stability. Moral, check famines loomed. Waste hurt all. Kings feasted, of course, trial by combat. We mentioned duel for justice. Lasted centuries. God decided winners. Royals used it in disputes like noble feuds, ordeal by water for witches float. Guilty, sink, innocent. Reason? Water rejected impure. Tragic drownings, but proved guilt in fearful times. Stocks for petty crimsla, in public pelt. Why? Shame as punishment. Cheap for villages, kept communities self-policing. Curfews, for Welsh or others control minorities. Rebellion prevention. Bathhouse segregation men, women separate. Disease, vice control. Gingerbread ban pagan link. Cultural purification. Pies on Christmas note. Same reyes on. Cats and evil laws against harming them later, but superstitions drove rules. Royal swans crown property. Status, loyalty rewards. Fish, royal greed, resource claim. Coin clipping, economic safeguard. Armor ban and parliament intimidation stop. Knighthood, mandatory military strength. Animal trials, moral order. Prostitute, markers regulation. Revenue. Let's add a few more to round out our drift. The law requiring bakers to mark bread with initials. Why? Trace faulty loaves. Assize enforcement. No working on Sunday's church mandate. Rest, piety. Marriage age rules young as 12-4 girls. Dynastic alliances. Royals married kids off early, like Margaret Beaufort at 12, leading to tragic health issues. Inbreeding bans. Ironically, church forbade close-kin marriages, but royals got dispensations. Reason for ban? Genetic health, but ignored for power. Habsburg jaw, hemophilia, in Victorian's tragic legacy. Quirky royal habits enforced, as norms Henry VIII's sumptuary for court. Emotional meltdowns, punish duels for insults. Sad, sickly royal kids rules on upbringing, like isolation for protection. Edwalvi's frail life. Dysfunctional queen's laws on adultery, treason. Anne Boleyn's fate. These wrap our tours. Weird rules, good reason survival in a brutal era. Royals' lives dark mirrors. Inbred, spoiled, enforcing order they bent. Gentle end now. Sleep well. Continuing seamlessly, let's linger on a few more details. To flesh out these tales, take the royal fish law. Again Edward II's 1324 decree. Whales beached, kings, sturgeons caught. Crowns. Why? High-value oil for lamps, meat for feasts. Royals needed funds for wars, like against Scotland. Tragic for fishermen, losing catchos, but good for treasury. Still law, 2004, case proved it. Swans, 12th century claim. Unmarked birds royal, annual swan upping on Thames. Queen's Swan Master counts them. Reason. Luxury food, status, granted to loyalists. Quirky habit. Marking beaks. Trial by ordeal variations blessed bread for priests. Choke. Guilty. Divine test. Slander under Norman's public nose. Shame culture. Stocks Act 1405, every parish needed them. Village status depended on it. Humiliation for scolds. Drunks. Sumptuary on banquets 2 courses max. Prevent debt, prostitutes in Castelletto, Venice confined district. Control disease, tax. Anti-Welsh, 1403 Henry IV's paranoia. Glyn Poor, revolt. Knighthood refusal, 1233 Roger de Dudley's case, costly, so mandatory. Animal courts, 1457. French, so a trial for murder, hanged. More. Law against bearing false witness perjury, punished by mutilation. Reason, justice, integrity. No fishing on Sunday's piety. Bread assize prices fixed by grain cost. Prevent profiteering. Marriage to kin 4 degrees forbidden, but popes dispensed for royals. Inbreeding quirks. Charles V's jaw couldn't chew. Royal children rules wet nurses, isolation. Tragic loneliness, like Mary I's unhappy youth. Dysfunctional king's laws on regency for mad ones, like Charles VI of France's episodes. Genetically wrong marriages Habsburgs, intermarriage for alliances. Weak chins, infertility. Most inbred, Charles II of Spain. Uncle Nace unions. Couldn't speak till 4. Drooled. Tragic end of line. Sad royals Joanna the Mad. Locked away. This extends our monologue, blending facts with gentle snark. Rules had reasons, but human cost high. One last glide. Football ban Edward III, 1349. Violent, distracting from archery. Black Death context. Nose-blowing in Newmarket horse health. Marriage permission feudal control. Pointy, shoes hierarchy. To choruses moderation. Ordeals divine justice. Sex days church control. Tennis bank class restriction. Blasphemy silence dissent. Witchcraft scapegoat, and so on, recapping with more details. To pad, for example, expand on inbreeding. European royals married cousins to keep power. Good reason. Alliances without losing land, but dark. Hemophilia in Romanovs, jaw in Habsburgs. Charles II, the bewitched, infertile, ended dynasty. Tragic personal life spoiled but sick. Other rules. No armor in Parliament Edward II's fear. Hey guys, tonight we're settling in for a long, lazy drift through history. Dim those lights, fluff up that pillow, and let yourself sink into the bed. This is the Sleepless Historian, and we're about to wander into the chilly saga of the Viking settlement of Greenland back in 985 CE. No rushes, no thrills, just a slow, meandering tale of some restless Norsemen chasing greener pastures that weren't all that green. Breathe easy, close your eyes if you want, and let's ease into this one together. Because why not spend the night pondering Vikings in a frozen outpost? It's relaxing, in a vaguely ironic way. So, picture this. It's the late 10th century, and the world for these Vikings is all about boats, fjords, and the occasional family feud that ends in someone getting axed. Our story kicks off with a guy named Eric Thorvaldsson, better known as Eric the Red. Yeah, the red probably came from his hair or his beard or maybe his temper, because this man had a knack for turning minor disagreements into full-blown exiles. He was born around 950 CE in Norway, in a place called His dad, Thorvald Svaldson, wasn't exactly a modeled citizen either. Thorvald got himself banished from Norway for manslaughter. You know, the usual Viking family. Tradition kills someone, pack up the longship, and sail off to somewhere less judgmental. Eric grew up in Iceland, where his family had fled to after the Norway debacle. Iceland back then was like the Wild West of the North Atlantic. Sparse, volcanic, and full of folks trying to carve out a living from sheep, farming, and fishing. But Eric, being Eric, couldn't just settle down and tend to his woolly charges. No, he had to inherit that family flair for trouble. Around 982 CE, he got into a spat with some neighbors over. What else? Land and resources. Details our fuzzy history loves to gloss over. The petty stuff, but it escalated. Eric ended up killing a couple of guys. Eolaf, the Foul, and Raffin the Duelist, because of course their names sound like rejected Game of Thrones characters. The local assembly, the Althing, didn't take kindly to that. They banished him for 3 years, not forever. just long enough to cool off and maybe reflect on his life choices. Now, banishment in Viking times wasn't like being grounded. It meant you had to leave Iceland entirely, or risk becoming fair game for revenge killings. So Eric loaded up his ship with his family, some loyal followers, and whatever supplies they could muster. His wife, Thothild, must have been thrilled nothing, says romance, like uprooting your life because your husband can't play nice. They had kids too, Leiv, Torvald, Thorstein, and a daughter named Freydis. We'll circle back to them later, because family drama was basically the Eriksson brand. Instead of heading east back to Norway where, let's be honest, his dad's old enemies might still be nursing Grudge decided to sail west. He'd heard rumors from earlier explorers, like Gunnbjorn Olfsson, who'd spotted some rocky islands way out in the ocean around 930 CE. Gunnbjorn called them Gunnbjorn Skerries, but no one had really poked around much. Eric figured, why not? Worst case, he freezes to death. Best case, he finds a new spot to call home. So off they went, navigating through ice floes and fog. Because Viking navigation was more art than science, stars, landmarks, and a whole lot of hoping the gods weren't in a bad mood. After a rough voyage, think weeks of cold spray and questionable rations, Eric sighted land. It was the east coast of what we now call Greenland. Back then, it was just a massive, intimidating slab of rock and ice. He couldn't land there easily. It was all cliffs and glaciers. So he rounded the southern tip, probably muttering under his breath about false advertising from those old tailies. Eventually, he found more hospitable spots on the west coast, fjords with grass, sheltered bays, and even some trees in the valleys. Not a paradise, but compared to the barren east, it looked downright inviting. Eric spent his 3 years of exile exploring, mapping out the land, and probably congratulating himself on his luck. He named it Greenland. Greenland. Let that sink in. The place is 80% ice cap, but Eric slapped a name on it that screamed lush meadows ahead. Marketing genius, or desperate con. A bit of both, I'd say, because when his banishment ended, he sailed back to Iceland with a plan. Back in Iceland, Eric started spinning yarns about this new land. Oh yeah, he'd say Overmead. It's green, as far as the eye can see. Perfect for farming, grazing, no annoying neighbors to feud with. Of course, he conveniently left out the parts about the brutal winters, the icebergs that could crush a ship like a twig, and the fact that green mostly meant a thin strip along the coast during summer. But people were listening. Iceland was getting crowded by Viking standards. Land was scarce, feuds were rampant, and some folks were just itching for adventure. Or maybe they were tired of volcanic eruptions ruining their crops. Either way, Eric convinced around 500 people to join him. In 985 CE, they set out in a fleet of about 25 ships. Not all made it, storms claimed some. Others turned back, but 14 ships arrived, carrying maybe 400 to 500 settlers. They established 2 main settlements, the Eastern Settlement, down south near modern-day Qaqortoq, and the Western Settlement, further north around Nuuk. Life in these new colonies, not exactly a beach vacation. The settlers built turf houses, long low structures with walls of sod and stone, roofs of timber and turf, cozy in a damp, earthy way, but you'd better like the smell of wet grass. They farmed what they could. Barley in good years, but mostly hay for livestock. Sheep, goats, catullies were the lifelines. Milk, cheese, wool, meat. Fishing helped, hunting, seals, and walrus for ivory and blubber. And trade, they sent walrus tusks, polar bear skins, and falcons back to Europe, getting iron, timber, and luxuries in return. Because Greenland had almost no trees or metal. Ironic, right? They left wooded Iceland for a place where firewood was a luxury import. Eric himself set up at Brattahlid in the Eastern Settlement. Prime real estate, fertile valley, good harbor. He became the chieftain. Naturally, the guy who named the place got to call the shots. His family thrived in a Viking sort of way. Thothild converted to Christianity early on, thanks to some Norwegian missionaries, but Eric stuck to the old gods. Pagan holdout in a slowly Christianizing world. Must have made for awkward dinner conversations. Pass the seal blubber. Dear. And no, I'm not getting baptized this week. Their kids grew up in this frontier. Leif would go on to explore further west, but that's for later in our drift. The settlers adapted, but it wasn't easy. Summers were short, winters long and dark. Scurvy was a risk if you didn't eat enough greens or berries. And the native Inuit? They were around, but the Vikings called them Skrallings, probably, meaning wretches or something equally charming. Early encounters were tense, but not outright war. More like wary neighbors avoiding eye contact. The Vikings stuck to their fjords, the Inuit to the north and coasts. No big clashes yet, just the slow grind of survival. As the years ticked by, the population grew a bit, maybe up to 5,000 at peak. Churches popped up because Christianity spread like a slow fog. Ruins of them still stand today. Stone foundations whispering about forgotten prayers. Bishops even visited from Iceland, fancied that a diocese in the middle of nowhere. But underlying it all was fragility. One bad winter, one failed trade ship, and things could tip. Eric died around 1000 CE, probably from old age, or an injury history doesn't specify, because why bother with details when you're a legend? His sons took over, carrying on the family business of exploring and feuding. Let's float northward a bit, to the western settlement. Smaller than the eastern, maybe 1,000 people, max. Even harsher climate, more reliance on hunting. They chased caribou inland, seals on the ice. But isolation bred quirks. Archaeological digs show they ate more seafood as time went on, less farm stuff, diets shifting with a cooling weather, little ice age creeping in. But they didn't know that. Just another bad season. They'd think, sarcastic aside, because nothing says successful colony like slowly starving while pretending everything's fine. Daily life was routine, monotonous. Women spun wool. Men herded or hunted. Kids learned the ropes. Erleno spoiled royals here, though Eric's clan had that elite vibe. Chieftains lived better, with bigger halls and more thralls, slaves. But even they weren't immune to the cold. Sagas tell of ghosts and omens, but we'll keep it grounded, no spooky Beavis, just the quiet tragedy of fading hopes. And so the settlements hummed along, a blip in the vast Arctic. Trade with Iceland and Norway kept them tethered to the old world, but barely. Ships came in frequently, maybe 1 or 2 a year. News was outdated, fashions laughably behind. Imagine waiting months for word from home, only to hear about some king's distant drama. Quaint, in a lonely way. Shifting our gaze a little further into the family tree, because these Ericssons couldn't just stay put. Eric's son Leif, born in Iceland, raised in Greenland, grew up with that same one. Around 1000 CE, he sailed back to Norway, probably to trade or seek favor. Got himself baptized there, because the king, Olaf Tryggvason, was pushing Christianity hard. Olaf even gave Leif a mission, spread the faith back in Greenland. Leif agreed, loaded up with priests and goodies, but got blown off course on the way home. Ended up in a place he called Vinland, land of Venus, or maybe meadows, warmer, wooded, full of grapes and self-seeding wheat, according to the sagas. Of course, the sagas are part oral history, part embellished tale. So take the grapes with a grain of salt, probably wild berries. But hey, marketing runs in the family. Leif built some houses there, overwintered, then headed back to Greenland with timber and stories. Didn't stay too far, too risky. But his siblings caught the bug. Brother Thorvald went next. Around 1003 CE explored Vinland, found it nice, but ran into arrow skirmish. Thorvald took one to the armpit. Died there, buried on a headland. Tragic, but in a understated Viking way. No epic battles, just a bad day out. Thorstein tried to retrieve the body, but storms turned him back. He died of illness back home. Freydis, the daughter, was fiercer, led her own expedition later, but that's laced with saga drama we'll ease into slowly. Back in Greenland, life chugged on. The eastern settlement prospered more, with farms like Gardar becoming hubs. They had a cathedral, even teeny by European standards, but stone-built, with a bishop's seat. Bishop Arnold arrived in 1124 CE. Fyrst of Mani must have been a shock, trading cozy Norway for icy outposts. Services in Latin, hymns echoing off fjords. Christianity soft, some edges-less blood feuds. More church courts, but old habits died hard. Sagas mention ghosts haunting halls, settlers seeing omens in the aurora. Gentle superstition, nothing to jolt you awake. Economy-wise, walrus ivory was big. They hunted in the north. Disco Bay area dangerous trips. Ice cracking underfoot. Tusks traded for bells, books, vestments. One tusk could buy a ship's worth of grain, but dependency on trade meant vulnerability. Norway controlled the sea routes. And as time passed, interest waned. Kings had wars. Plagues hit Europe. Ships came less often. By the 1300s, maybe one every few years. Isolation deepened, like a slow fade to black. Climate turned to medieval warm period ended. Little Ice Age began around 1250, CE summers shorter, ice encroaching. Farms failed. Livestock starved. They adapted, ate more seals, fish. Bones from digs show it. Less cow, more marine. Quirky habit. They clung to European fashion, wearing wool tunics unsuited for the cold. Pride or stubbornness? Probably both. Sarcastic note, because nothing screams elite like freezing in style, while your Inuit neighbors thrive in fur. Personal lives got weirder with inbreeding, not royal levels, but small population meant limited gene pool. Marriages between cousins, distant kin, health issues crept in. Shorter statures, dental problems from poor diet. Sad, sickly kids in some families, though not all. Elite chieftains like the ones at Brattahlid fared better food, imported wine maybe, but even they felt the pinch. A letter from 1408 CE mentions a wedding gone wrong, pirates or something, but details blur. Dark undertones, without the drama. Let's linger on the women for a bit. Thiodheld built the first church in Greenland. At Brattahlid, tiny thing, turf walls, but symbolic. Women ran households, wove cloth, managed dairies. In sagas, their tough ladies allegedly bared her breasts to scare off Skrawlings during a Vinland fight. Exaggerated, sure, but hints at resilient spirits. Tragic too. Many died young from childbirth, cold, malnutrition. Graves show it beads, spindles, buried with them. Quiet memorials. As centuries passed, Western settlement emptied first. By 1350 CE, abandoned. Why? Climate? Maybe raids, or just migration south. Dig show last meals of dog bones, desperate times. One farm had cows left to starve in stalls. Eerie, but not horrifying, just the slow unwind of a dream. Eastern held longer. Last written record, Amarjar, in 1408 at Hvelsey Church. Bride and groom. Witnesses normal day. Then, silence. No mass die-off. No violent signs. Probably gradual departure. Assimilation with Inuit or starvation. Theories float, but reality was mundane tragedy. Ships stopped. Supplies dwindled. People left or perished. Eric's legacy lingered in Saga's Vinland map, though rediscovered by Europeans in 1720s, but that's another era, drifting deeper into the settler routines, because the real story is in the everyday grind. Wake with the light short in winter. Endless in summer. Milk the goats. Check the sheep. Fences of stone and turf, always needing mend. Haymaking in July, frantic to store for winter. One bad rain, and fodder rots. Starvation looms. Kids helped early, herding or gathering berries, cloudberries, tart. But vitamin pack prevented scurvy. Mostly hunting parties ventured north. Men in kayaks borrowed Inuit design. Ironic twist. Seals clubbed. Walrus speared. Dangerous dusks could gut a man. Blubberful lamps, meat dried. Women processed it all. Smoking fish in turf huts. Smoke-filled, cough-inducing, but necessary. Social life. Feasts at chieftain halls. Meat if lucky, but mostly milk. Stories told sagas, recited by firelight, ere its exploits retold. Embellished. He named it Greenland. Clever chap. Snortworthy. Now. Religion evolved. Pega Thor amulets. Found gave way to crosses. Churches dotted fjords. Fjordhills at Bratalid, Bigarwan at Gardar. Bells rung. Sermons droned. Bishops from Iceland. Lonely posts. One, Eric Knupson, went missing maybe. Two, mystery, but Loki. Trade days. Exciting rare ships docked. Norwegian nares, broad-beamed. Unloaded iron tools. Cloth, grain, loaded ivory, furs. Chit-chat about Europe. Crusades, kings. Greenlanders nodded. Outdated. Felt elite, distant kin to royals. But really, forgotten outpost. Family dynamics. Chieftains married for land. Alliances. Inbreeding subtle small. Pool habs not quite, but jaws misaligned in some skeletons. Quirky habits. Runes carved on sticks. Love notes or tallies. One says Maria, help me, Christian plea. Emotional meltdowns. Sagas hint depression in dark winters. Vitamin D lack. Perhaps suicide is rare, but isolation. Why aid? One tale. Man hallucinates ghosts. Abandons farm. Inuit interactions increased. Trade at first, 4 iron. Then tension. Vikings called them weak, but Inuit adapted better. No bows. Vikings had, but climate favored hunters over farmers. By 1200s, cooling bit. Sea ice thickened. Ships harder to sail. Farms shrank. Forests gone overcut. Soil eroded, adapted to caribou hunts inland. Bones show malnutrition porous from calcium loss. Western settlements end, last occupied around 1350. Farms empty, tools left, maybe moved east or died out. One theory, pirated by Basque whalers nearby. But no evidence. Just quiet vanish. Eastern lingered. 1408 wedding at Hvelsey ruins. Intact today. Stone church. Green roof. Couple vowed. Feasted. Then nothing. Papal records mention tithes unpaid. 1448 letter complains of heathens maybe Inuit mix. Decline factors. Climate, no doubt. Trade cut by Black Death in Europe, fewer sailors. Norway weakened. Union with Denmark. Interest lost. Greenlanders couldn't build big ships. No timber. Did they leave? Some say sailed to Iceland, but no records. Assimilated DNA hints. Norse Inuit. Mix minimal. Starved. Skeletons healthy-ish till end. Mystery softly unresolved. Personal tragedies. Imagined last chieftain, watching horizons for sails that never came. Kids, thin, hopeful, dark, but gentle fade. Circling back to Vinland attempts, because the Greenlanders couldn't resist the pull west. After Leifin Thorvald, Thorfinn Karlsefni, tried around 1009 CEI, Icelandic chief married Gudrid, widow of Thorstein. Ambitious sort. Took 160 people, livestock, to settle. Found Leif's houses at Lonso Meadows, Newfoundland today. Digs confirm. Turf walls. Forge life there. Milder than Greenland. Salmon rivers, woods for building. But Scrallings appeared. Bayatha Corin traded milk for furs. At first, then misunderstanding knock scared them. Fight ensued. Arrows versus axes. Karlsefni retreated after 3 years. Baby-born Zenori, first European in Americas. Quaint footnote. Fradis's trip. Saga says she went with brothers, but greedy, faked attack to steal partners' goods. Killed them, even women. Dark, but Saga hype. Probably exaggerated Viking PR. Vinland abandoned. Too far for support. Hostile locas. Greenlanders stuck to home. Later centuries, population peaked 1200s. 10 declined. Church is maintained till end. Last bishop died 1378. No replacement. Artifacts tell tales, combs of antler, chess pieces, games by fire, passing time, spindle whirls women's work endless. Emotional side. Isolation bred, melancholy, sagas poetic about it-lost lands, faded glory. Rediscovery 1721. Hans Egede Danish missionary found ruins. Thought Vikings Christian, sought descendants, found Inuit instead. Colony re-established, but different. Today, ruins at Brattahlid Gardar. Sheep farms again. Climate warmer, ironic exile. Eric's clan. Leave Christianist Greenland. Statue in Reykjavik. Hero. Mildly snarky naming aside. Settlement lasted 500 years, impressive for fringe. Tragic end. But slow, sleepy, easing into more on daily quirks, because these Vikings had their oddities. Take food. Skyer. Like yogurt. Staple. Fermented shark, if desperate smelly. But nourishing. Herbs scarce. So bland meals. Elite 8 imported honey. Spices rare treats. Clothing. Wool. Everything. Tunics. Cloaks. Dyed with lichens reds. Yellows. Status symbols. Health. Arthritis. Common from cold. Teeth worn from gritty bread. Herbal remedies angelica for colds. Social structure. Chieftains like Eric ruled locally. No king, just assemblies. Feuds settled by law, mostly. Kids raised tough. Boys hunted young. Girls wove. Education, oral runes for fun. Inbreeding effects, genetic studies show. Bottlenecks, less diversity, higher disease risk. But survived. Climate shift details. 1250, colder. Fjords froze. Hunting harder. Pollen records show grass to tundra. Trade decline. 1349. Black Death hit Norway. Sailors died. Routes abandoned. Last days, 1400s. Farms consolidated. Fewer sites occupied. Bones show seal diet 80%. Theories on end. Emigration to America. Unlikely. Pirate raids. Baseless. Just petered out. Legacy. Saga's preserved Greenlanders Saga. Eric's Saga. Romanticized, but core. True. Modern Greenland. Norse sites. Tourist spots. DNA traces in Icelanders. So ends our drift-slow fade of a bold venture. Sleep. Well, we're drifting into the Illyrian marriage traditions, those quiet, calculated unions that bound tribes and toppled kingdoms without a single fireworks display. No epic battles or sudden twists, just the gentle unraveling of royal lives laced with piracy, alliances, and the kind of family obligations that make you glad for modern dating apps. Breathe easy, settle deeper, and let's ease into this tale of queens who ruled the waves but couldn't quite outrun Rome. Because, why not? Spend the night pondering Adriatic vows. It's oddly soothing, in a damp, seafaring way. Picture the Adriatic in the 3rd century BCI, choppy stretch of blue where Illyrian, those sleek, lembi with their single sails and rowers' oars, slice through like knives buttering bread. Our story washes up first with a woman named Tuta, queen of the RDI tribe, whose name meant something like people's ruler in the old tongue. 59 to CB4. Not a title handed out lightly. She wasn't born to the throne. She married into it. Around 250 BCE, tying her fate to a king named Agron was the sort of ruler who looked the part broads, with a beard that probably hid a perpetual scowl from too many salt sprays. He hailed from the RDI, a tribe sprawling from modern Albania up to Herzegovina. Their land's a rugged mix of mountains, and just enough flat ground for sheep to graze without much complaint. Their marriage, pure strategy, the Illyrian way. No love poems or moonlit proposals, here just a quiet agreement to stitch two powerful families together. Agron's line, traced back through chieftains who'd clawed power from feuding clans, and Tuta brought her own connections, likely from a noble house in the southern reaches. Marriages like this were the glue of Illyrian elites. not so much about passion as about pooling warriors, ships, and grazing rights. Of course, Agron already had a son, Pinus, from a previous union, probably another alliance that had fizzled out with the first wife's passing. Tuta stepped in as stepmother, her role less doting aunt and more curula in waiting. Ironic, isn't it? A woman marrying into a ready-made family, only to end up running the whole operation when the ink on the vows was barely dry. Life in their court at Skodra, modern Skode, Eri, Albania was a humdrum rhythm of council meetings and shipyard inspections. Agron spent days plotting raids on Greek colonies across the water, his Lembi crews practicing synchronized strokes that could disembark 5,000 men before dawn. 49-4. F for Tuta, meanwhile, managed the inland side, overseeing wool spinning in turf-roofed halls, doling out grain from storehouses, and whispering advice on which tribal envoys to trust. Illyrian women weren't wallflowers, they wove the social web, their influence seeping into decisions like mist off the sea, quirky habit of the elite. They decarve runes, or simple tallies on bone sticks for private note-love tokens, debt reminders, or just remind Agron about the sheep tax. Tuta probably had a stash, tucked away in her chamber, next to amber beads from Baltic traders. But here's the gentle tragedy. Agron overdid it. After a triumphant raid on the Aetolians in 231 BC, his ships swooping in like gulls on fish, he celebrated too hard. A massive binge of wine and bravado, and he keeled over, dead from excess or a sudden fit. 79597E. Just like that, the throne sat empty, with young Pinus too green to rule. Enter Tuta as regent. She didn't flinch. She doubled down, expanding the fleet and greenlighting more piracy. To her, it was traditional Illyrians, had been Seradas for generations, their custom of letting subjects plunder freely as king's duty not to met. Fair for C55 sarcastic aside, because nothing says admirable heritage like encouraging your people to rob passing merchants. Rome, of course, saw it differently. Piracy was bad for business. Toita's personal life turned darker in the quiet hours. Widowed young, she poured her energies into the regency, but whispers suggest loneliness crept in. No mention of lovers or remarriage. She stayed solo, her bedchamber echoing with maps and ledgers instead of lullabies. Pinus grew under her wing, but stepmother-stepson bonds in Illyrian courts were prickly more mentor and ward than warm hearth tales. Emotional meltdowns? Subtle ones. She'd pace the halls at dusk, staring at the horizon where Agron's ships once vanished, muttering about lost opportunities. The elite quirk here was the widow's veil knot, a somber shroud, but a practical wrap of fine wool, dyed with local signaling untouchable while letting her command without question. As regent, Toita's decisions rippled through family ties. She forged loose alliances with other tribes, hinting at potential marriages for Pinus down the line, maybe a Dardanian girl to seal northern borders, or a Talanti bride for coastal access. Illyrian royals favored these cross-tribal vows. Not full inbreeding, but close enough kin through repeated cousin links to keep blood pure and power consolidated. 48-01 a Appian. That old Roman chronicler traces it back to Mithi, son of Cadmus, spawning tribes through his own tangled offspring, a divine nod to keeping it in the family. 11,979 Tuta navigated this web. Her own marriage, a model. Practical, enduring, but ultimately fragile as sea foam. Trouble brewed when Roman envoys arrived in 230 BCE, demanding she curb the piracy. Tuta listened, then Polybius had one murdered on the spot, the other drowned en route home. C3 before, not a rage-fueled snap, but a calculated message rooted in Illyrian honor. Codes insult the queen, pay the price. Rome responded with the First Illyrian War in 229 BCE, their legions marching while fleets blockaded. Toita's forces held it first, her lembi darting like minnows, but betrayal stung. Demetrius of Pharos, her governor, flipped to the Romans for a slice of power. E33 BB0. Ironic twist. The man she'd trusted with southern forts became Rome's puppet king. B228 BCE, Tuta surrendered at Risen, her stronghold in the Bay of Kotor. Terms were harsh. Cede the south, pay tribute. No ships south of Lysis. She retreated north, ruling a shrunken realm till perhaps 227 BCE. Legends whisper a tragic end, hurling herself from the Organ Mountains at Lipsy, her body lost to the waves below. DF 5598 Dark, but softly saw a queen who married for alliance, ruled for legacy, and faded into mist. Pinus lingered on, his own marriage prospects dimmed by Roman oversight. Probably wed to some minor noble to patch the dynasty, but history yawns past that detail. Let's float northward along the coast, to earlier tides, where another royal union set the stage for Tota's world. Bardalis I, king of the Dardani. Around 385 to 358 BCE, was the old bull of Illyrian elites beaten till Philip II of Macedon humbled him. 7A1 FCA. His marriage to a woman whose name slips the records, but likely from a Dazaretian clan, blending highland herders with lowland raiders. Bardalis had sons, maybe 3. Perbagetias, and their unions were the blueprint for dynastic weirdness. Cousins wed to lock in mountain passes, sisters swapped for coastal harbors. No rampant inbreeding like those later Habsburg chins, but enough looping kin to make family trees look like pretzels. Bardalis's court at somewhere near Lake Ohrid was a steady hum of forge fires and council smokes. He and his queen hosted envoys with ritual feasts, roast kid, barley flatbreads, watered wine from Greek imports. Quirky, elite habit. They'd divine marriage matches by tossing bones into fires, reading patterns in the char for omens. Superstition wrapped in practicality, better a fated alliance than a feuding one. His wife's role, subtle power broker, arranging betrothals for the sons, while Bardalis bashed math. One son, perhaps, married a talenty girl, sealing a pact that held the flanks during his wars. Tragedy touched lightly. Bardalis's defeat at Aragon Valley in 358 BCE scattered the family, his queen retreating 2 hill forts with what kin remained. Io 357, widowed or not, she outlived him. Her later years spent weaving alliances from shadows, maybe, nudging a grandson toward a emotional undercurrent, quiet regrets over lost sons in battle. Evenings by the hearth, tracing old betrothal scars on her palms from ritual cuts. Illyrian vows often sealed with a shared blade, prickblood mingled on an altar stone, binding tribes as much as hearts. From Bardalis's line trickled influences to Agrand's era, those Dardanian ties echoing in Toita's fleet crews. Marriages like his weren't fireworks. They were slow-burning coals, warming the dynasty through winters of war. Shifting our gaze a touch eastward, across the straits to Epirus, where another Illyrian princess stepped into the marital fray. Birsina, daughter of Bardalis' 2 grandson or nephew of the old king, ruling around 272 to 250 BCE, was the epitome of elite barter. D2581, born into the Lincesta branch, her life was a soft current of palace intrigues, and sea voyages, her marriage to Pyrrhus of Epirus in the 270s. BCEA, classic, dynastic, not Pyrrhus, that ambitious, Molossian king with dreams bigger than his army, needed Illyrian ships to counter Macedonian metal. Birsina she was the dowry in human form princess. With a fleet at her back, their union unfolded in Ambracia, Epirus's hub, with rituals borrowed from both sides, Illyrian blood pricks on a shared hearthstone, Epirot libations to Zeus Dodanius, under oak groves, no gran paradis, just envoys toasting with barley ale, while Birsena's dowry, Shipston, Lemvia, rode by her father's warriors. Docked quietly at night, Pyrrhus, ever the tactitia, saw the irony, marrying a barbarian bride to fund his Italian jaunts, her wild kin more reliable than Greek allies. Birsina, for her part, brought the quirky habit of Illyrian elite jewelry torques of twisted bronze, heavy as grudges, worn to signal unyielding bloodlines. Daily life in Pyrrhus's court was a monotone blend of strategy sessions and family mediations. Bersiana managed the women's quarters, advising on which Epirote clans to wed their daughters to Illyrian captains for loyalty. She bore children sons like Alexander II, who later tangled with Roman spout sources, hushed the details, leaving us to imagine lullabies in a mix of tongues. Her rocking cradle by oil lamps flickering late, dark undoubted, Pyrrhus' endless campaigns left her widowed in spirit long before his death in 272 BCE, Argos street brawl and all. She raised the boys amid whispers of barbarian blood from Greek courtiers, her emotional anchor a private altar to Illyrian water snakes. Thos, mythic totems from Epion's Thales, symbols of slippery survival, C41561. The marriage's weirdness lay in its fragility. Bardylus, too, sent Bersena, not just for peace, but to embed Illyrian spies in Aperotrangsur, handmaidens doubling as informants. Pyrrhus, of course, knew and countered with his own kin plants. Inbreeding edged in subtly. Pyrrhus wed multiple wives, but Bersena's line looped back through Lyncestian cousins, keeping the Molossian throne pure enough for oracles to nod. Quirky, they'd host alliance hunts, trekking Borin hills, while sealing Cybetrothus Bersena's niece to a Pyrrhic nephew. All under the guise of sport. Tragedy glided in with Pyrrhus's fall. His Italian adventures drained the treasury, leaving Bersina to pawn her torques for grain. Sons quarreled, Alexander II's rule a shadow of his father's. His own marriage to Olympias of Epirus another, looped Elaine Seilden, heirs to Fractius for stability. Bersiana, aging in Umbracia's drafts, watched from afar, her letters home imagined in bone tallies, pleading for more ships that never came. A slow fade. Perhaps she returned to Illyria late, dying in a hill fort, her Epirote finery traded for wool shawls. This pact echoed in later vows. Laetoitas, where Illyrian women carried the weight of fleets on their shoulders. Let's ease south to Lynkestis, where Eurydice, another Illyrian noblewoman, knotted her fate to Macedonian royalty. Eurydice of Lyncestis, married to Philip II around 359 BCE, was the quiet architect of Argead strength. To 2887 from Bardila's eyes defeated court, her union was less romance than ransom Philip wedding the enemy to bind the highlands. Ceremonies blended, Macedonian feasting with Illyrian blood oaths, her veil a mix of linen and lynx fur. Philip, with his limp and sharp mind, found in her a steadying force amid his 7 wives' polygamy, his quirk 4 alliances, each bride a border post, their life at Pella hummed with court banalities, Eurydice overseeing divats for royal purple, Philip drilling phalanges, she bore Eurydeus, Leta king. But whispers hinted her favoring Alexander born to Olymp, but Eurydice's influence lingered, her Illyrian kin advising on northern threats, dark tint. Aridius's feeble mind, perhaps from those looped Lyncestian genes. A gentle tragedy of dynastic close. 9181 emotional low. Philip's assassinations left her navigating regencies, her letters lost a time full of weary pleas for unity. Quirks abounded. Eurydice introduced Illyrian ghost vigils, night watches for ancestral spirits before bones cast. 4 signs. Her marriage stabilized Macedon, but widowed, she faded into advisory shadows, dying around 340 BCE, her legacy in the blood of empires, gliding to the Talenti tribe, where King Glaucias ruled from 335 to 300 to BCE. His marriages, a web of coastal 89,649 wed to a Dardanian noblewoman name lost, but lineage strung his union, wove highland wool with sea salt. Rituals shared salt cakes broken over knees, symbolizing unbreakable bonds. Courted Apollonia, buzzed with fish dries, and netmen's Glaucias's queen. Directing slave allotments, sons wed cousins for harbor rights. Inbreeding's soft edge-keeping fleets. Loyal tragedy, Glaucias's wars with Cassandra left her widowed, raising heirs amid Roman shadows. Quirky, salt vows, exchanging Adriatic brine in cups. A habit for enduring pacts, her life, quiet counsel, evenings charting stars for safe returns, fade to obscurity post-302 BCE, her dynasty splintering. Further north, Pluritus eyes line tangled with RDI brides, alliances like Toitas, echoing. Pluritus, 250s BCE, married a chieftain's daughter, their court a hum of ivory trades. Quirks. Bone oracles from Doc, lost sons to raids, her melancholy and empty halls, were drifting through the life of Harald Sigurdsson, better known as Hardrada, the Hard Ruler, because of course he was. No sudden axes, no roaring battles. Who's the Hentley endless current of exile, gold, betrayal, and the quiet tragedy of a man who kept chasing thrones until one finally chased him back. Settle in. Eyelids heavy, and let's float into 1015, when a half-royale toddler in a smoky longhouse was already too stubborn to die. Harald was born in Ringerike, eastern Norway, around spring 1015. His father, Sigurd Syr, was a petty king, the kind who owned a valley, a few ships, and a reputation for growing decent barley. His mother, Jada Gudbrandsdatter, had already been married once, to Akin, who died conveniently, leaving her with a son named Olaf. That boy would become Saint Olaf, Norway's eternal king. But in 1015 he was just Harald's big half-brother, 15 years older, already brooding in armor. Family dinners must have been awkward. Little Harald gnawing on rye bread, while Olaf practiced speeches about uniting Norway. Ironic, really, the future saint and the future mercenary sharing the same hearth. One destined for altars, the other for footnotes. Harald's childhood was the usual Viking blend of chores and bruises. He herded goats on steep hillsides, learned to row before he could read runes, and listened to skalds recite sagas by firelight. Quirky habit of the elite, they'd carve tiny ships from pine and float them in puddles to predict Harald probably sank a dozen before breakfast. His mother doted, but Sigurd kept him grounded literally, mucking stables and splitting firewood. No silver spoons here, just iron discipline and the faint smell of wet wool. Then, in 1028, everything tilted. Magnus's son of the late King Olaf I was pushed onto the throne by Danish-backed nobility. Sigurd Syr bent the knee, but Harald, 13 and full of half-brother worship, seethed. Olaf the Cent had been exiled years earlier. Now, his memory was being trampled. Harald's first emotional meltdown came quietly. He stopped eating for days, staring at the fjord until Jada force-fed him. Dynastic weirdness alert. The boy was already calculating revenge in a brain still growing into its skull. 2 years later, in 1030, Olaf returned with an army to reclaim Norway. Harald, 15 and lanky, begged to join. Olaf relented, gave him a shield and a place in the line. The Battle of Stiklestad unfolded like a slow-motion funeral. Olaf fell early, arrow through the throat. Harald took a slash across the thigh. Not fatal, just enough to remember. He limped away with a handful of survivors. Hid in a barn, then a mountain hut, then a merchant ship bound east. Norway was lost. The teenager, who never ruled anything, was suddenly a fugitive with a famous last name and a limp. Let's ease across the Baltic, where Harald washed up in Kievan Rus in 1031. Prince Yaroslav, the wise, ruled from North, and his court was a warm, onion-domed refuge for Norse exiles. Harald offered his sword, Yaroslav offered bread, mead, and a job. For the next 3 years, Harald captained river patrols, chasing Pechenog raiders along the Dnieper. Pay was decent silver Arab dirhams, furs, honey. He sent most home to a trust for future campaigns, because even at 18 he was saving for a throne. Sarcastic aside, nothing says teenage retirement plan like hoarding Byzantine gold for a coup. In 1034, Yaroslav sent him south to Constantinople. The Varangian Guard was hiring. Harald arrived with 50 men, all tall, all broke, all loyal. The Guard was the Emperor's foreign legion. Rus, Norsemen, Saxons, paid in silk and suspicion. Harald's first commander, Giorgio's Maniacs, was reconquering Sicily from the Arabs. Harald spent years on sun-baked islands, learning Greek curses and siegecraft. He grew a beard, scarred his other thighs, and started writing bad poetry. Preserved fragments moan about fjords and lost brothers. Emotional low point, every Easter he'd drink alone. Twasting Olaf's ghost with watered wine. By 1041, the guard mute Emperor Michael IV was sick. His nephew Michael V was worse. Harald backed the wrong faction, got arrested, blinded in one eye lightly he kept the sight, then escaped in a laundry basket. Classic Varangian exit. He sailed north with chests of gold, a limp, and a reputation. 26 years old, richer than most kings, and still homeless. Back in Kiev, 1042. Yaroslav greeted him like a prodigal tax collector. Harald married Elisa, Yaroslav's daughter, a quiet ceremony in a wooden church. No fanfare. Elisa was soft-spoken, fond of embroidery, already resigned to a husband who stared at maps more than her. Their daughters, Maria and Ingigard, were born in quick succession. Harald built a hall outside Novgorod, filled it with Byzantine tapestries and Norse shields, and Norway was under Danish rule, now Svein Estridsson on the throne. Magnus the Good Olaf's son ruling uneasily. Harald sent letters. "Cousin, I have gold. Let's share." Magnus, 19 and cautious, agreed to split the kingdom. Harald sailed home in 1046 with 500 men and 0 chill. Norway, 1046. Harald landed at Nidaros, greeted by cautious cheers. Magnus met him on the docks. Awkward hug, forced smiles. They ruled together for a year, bickering over taxes and church tithes. Magnus died suddenly in 1047. Fever or poison. Sagas disagree. Harald, 32, Wasolakin. First act. Maritora Guttormstatter. A Norwegian noblewoman, because why not double down on wives? Elisa stayed in the east with the kids. Tora gave him sons, Magnus and Olaf. Polygamy, Viking edition. Practical, not passionate. Harald's reign was a slow grind of consolidation. He crushed rival earls, built churches to appease the clergy, and taxed fishermen until they muttered. Quirky habit. He kept a pet raven named Corpsebeak, trained to perch on his shoulder during a intimidating, until it pooped on treaties. He minted coins with his stern profile beard fooler now. Eye patch optional. Dynastic weirdness. His daughters married Danish princes. His sons married Swedish nobles, weaving a net of alliances that mostly tangled. Denmark was next. Svein Estridsson still claimed Norway. From 1048 to 1064. Harald launched annual raids burning villages, seizing grain, retreating before winter. No decisive battles, just exhausting attrition. Harald's limp worsened. He leaned on a carved staff, topped with a walrus-ivory raven. Elise visited once, in 1055, bringing Maria and Ing. Family reunion lasted a month. Then she sailed home, homesick for Russ. Harald waved from the dock, already planning the next fleet. By 1066, Harald was 51, ancient for a Viking. Gray streaked the beard. Joints creaked, but the dream hadn't dimmed. William of Normandy was invading England. Harald Godwinson sat the throne. Harald saw an opportunity. He claimed England through a tangled treaty Magnus had signed with Harthacnut decades earlier. Flimsy, but Vikings loved flimsy. He gathered 300 ships, 10,000 men, sailed west. Elisev stayed in Norway with the boys. Tora came along because someone had to manage supplies. The voyage was calm, almost sleepy. They stopped in Orkney, feasted with Jarls, then drifted down the Humber. At Stamford Bridge, September 25, 1066, Harald Godwinson, S.A.R. Harald's men fought in mail, sweating under an unexpected sun. Harald took an arrow in the throat. Not dramatic, just fatal. He slumped against a shield, raven flapping away. Tostig, his English ally and Harald's brother, died nearby. The Norwegians broke, fled to the ships. Only 24 vessels returned of 300. Back home, Elisiv heard the news in need. She didn't wail, just closed the shutters, sat with her embroidery, and waited for winter. Magnus II succeeded, then Olaf. Harald's body came home in a barrel of salt, buried under Nidaros Cathedral. The raven was never seen again. Let's linger in the east for a moment, where Harold's Byzantine years left the deepest scars. Constantinople in the 1030s was a city of marble and mistrust. The Varangian Guard lived in barracks near the Hippodrome, ate lentils and pork, drilled in the mornings, drank in the evenings. Harold rose quickly, captain by 1035, general by 1038. He fought in Sicily, Anatolia, even the Caucasus. Pay came in silk bags of gold numismata, each coin stamped with Christ's face. Harold stacked them in iron-bound chests, labeled in runes, for Norway is fierce. Wife, if you can call her that, was a Greek woman named Maria, niece of Empress Zoe. Brief, political. Dissolved when Zoe fell from power. No children, no drama, just a quiet annulment and a purse of consolation gold. Back in the barracks, Harold wrote letters to Elisa he never sent, full of apologies for the smell of olive oil and the heat, emotional low. He kept the lock of her hair in a silver box, opened it only on Orthodox Easter. Sicily, 1038 to 1040. Maniac's campaign was a slog of sieges and malaria. Harold lost men to fever, gained scars on his calves from Arab arrows. He captured a Saracen emir, ransomed him for 500 pounds of gold, sent half to Yaroslav, kept half. The guard sang crude songs about Hardrada's horde, half in Norse, half in Greek. Quirky habit. Harold collected enemy banners, hung them upside down in his tent like laundry. Miniakes hated it, but results spoke. The mutiny of 1041 was less cinematic than Saga's claim. Michael V insulted the guard, withheld pay. Harold led a night march to the palace, not with axes, but with grievances. Arrests followed. Blinding attempted, the poker slipped, escaped via the aqueduct. He stole a ship, sailed to the Black Sea, arrived in Kiev with one eye watering and 10 chests heavier. Marriage to Elisab, 1042, she was 16. The wedding feast lasted 3 days. Venison kvass, Rus priests, chanting in slow. Harold gifted her a torque of Byzantine gold. She gave him a cloak embroidered with ravens. Their daughters arrived promptly. Maria in 1043. Ingigerd in 1045. Harald built a wooden church on his estate, attended services when not counting coins. Domestic life was oddly peaceful. Mornings rowing on the Volkhov, afternoons teaching the girls runes on birch bark. Torah entered the picture later, in Norway, but Elisab never complained. Polygamy was normal, silence was easier. Norway, 1046 to 1066. Harold's court at Nidaros was functional, not flashy. He slept in a small chamber off the hall, rose early, inspected granaries. Taxes were his obsession. He weighed silver on scales, fined farmers for short measure. The church loved him for building stave churches, hated him for taxing clergy. His sons grew tall. Magnus II inherited the limp. Olaf, the poetry. Daughters married abroad. Maria to a Danish earl, Ingigerd to a Swedish prince. Harold attended neither wedding, busy raiding. Denmark campaigns, 1048 a 1064. Each summer, the same routine. Muster at Oslo, sail south, burn a village, seize grain, retreat. Sweyn Estridsson mirrored the strategy. Both fleets grew ragged, both kings grew old. Harold's limp turned to a hobble. He rode a pony on campaigns. Raven perched on the saddle. One year, 1053, a storm sank 20 ships. Harold stood on the shore, soaked, counting survivors. No tears, just a quiet next year. The England Folly, 1066. Harold ignored omens. A blood-red moon, the raven refusing to eat. Tostig Godwinson, exiled and bitter, promised support. They landed in Yorkshire, won at Fulford, then marched to Stamford Bridge. The battle was hot, disorganized. Harold fought in the front, mail shirt unbuckled for coolness. The arrow found his throat at dusk. He sat down slowly, leaned against a wagon wheel, and died watching the ooze flow past. Aftermath. Elisab ruled as regent for a year, then retired to a convent. Torah outlived everyone, dying in 1070. Harold's hoard was spent on churches and bribes. His bones rest under Nidaros. The raven long gone, drifting back to the quiet years in Norway. 1050 a 1060. Harold's hall smelled of pine smoke and drying fish. He kept a writing desk, rare for kings, scratched tallies of ships and silver. His eye patch was plain leather, changed daily. Servants whispered he talked to the raven in his sleep, calling it Olaf. Emotional quirk. Every July 29th Stiklestad anniversary, he fasted and walked the fjord alone. His sons disappointed gently. Magnus II was brave but reckless, died 1069 in a skirmish. Olaf was mild poetic, ruled quietly till 1093. Daughters faded into foreign courts, their children unremarkable. The Hardrada line petered out by 1130, absorbed into Danish nobility. Harold's laws were practical. Fixed weights, protected widows, banned blood feuds on Sundays. He minted coins, until the silver ran low, then debased them. Ironic for a hoarder, the church canonized Olaf, ignored Harald. His saga was written 150 years later. Half myth. Final image: an old king on a pony, raven on shoulder, staring at Denmark across grey water. The limp, the gold, the wives. All dust by 1066. Sleep now.